the cloud. Okay, and now I'm going to start.
Okay, well, I can ask you about drafting. How is that going right now?
It's going. Yeah, book 3 is already finished and turned in. I'm working on book 4 right now.
Oh, okay, cool. Oh my gosh, that's so exciting. How many books do you think are going to be in the final series? Are you allowed to say?
Right now, my original contract was for 3 books, and then they extended it at the beginning of this year. So now I currently have a contract for up to 6 books.
Oh my gosh, that's so exciting.
And then after that, who knows?
It might keep going, might not. Yeah. We'll see. Okay, well, I guess we'll get started. Good evening, everyone. I'm Maya from the BookTalk team, and I want to thank you all for coming to our BookTalk Book Club author event. So our book club on Fable started last year, and we focus on discussing one book each month that fits BookTalk's mission of diversifying bookshelves and promoting inclusive and equitable storytelling. If you haven't already, you can join and start reading and discussing with us at fable.co/booktalk, and that's TALK. And on the Fable app, where we can read, we can share annotations, and then we can also start conversations right inside the ebook. Today, I am so honored and so pleased to be welcoming the incredible author of this month's BookTalk Book Club pick, Arsenic and Adobo, Mia Manansala. So,
hi.
Yes, a little bit about Mia. Mia Manansala is a writer and book coach from Chicago who loves books, baking, and badass women. Love that. She uses humor and murder to explore aspects of the Filipino diaspora, queerness, and her millennial love for pop culture. A lover of all things geeky, Mia spends her days procrastinating, playing, I don't know if I'm gonna get this right, JRPGs, and dating Sims, reading cozy mysteries and diverse romance, and cuddling her dogs, Gumiho and Max Power. I was kind of expecting Longanisa in there, but her debut novel, Arsenic and Adobo, came out on May 4th of 2021 with Berkeley and Penguin Random House, and it's the first novel in the Tita Rosie's Kitchen Mystery series. The sequel, Homicide and Hallo Hallo, is out now. You can find her on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at MPM the Writer. I'm beyond excited to be having this conversation with Mia, and just want to thank you for being here with us tonight.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, I'm super hyped. So let's dive right in to the conversation. I'm honestly so excited to be reading Arsenic and Adobo with the BookTalk Book Club this month. For someone who might not be super familiar with your works, how would you describe the books that you write?
Sure. So my series is called the Tita Rosie's Kitchen Mystery series. Tita means aunt in Tagalog. And it is a cozy mystery. And so for people who are kind of new to cozy mystery, because I've learned a lot of people were not familiar with this subgenre, I like to describe them as Hallmark movies with dead bodies. Basically, they're light, they're humorous, there's always a happy ending, there is no on the page graphic violence or sex or swearing or anything like that. I literally wrote a book that my mom could write. And so this series follows a young Filipino American woman from a small Midwestern town just outside of Chicago. In Arsenic and Adobo, it is her trying to pick up the pieces of her life after things kind of fall apart. And so she, has to deal with a horrendous breakup. She moves back home to kind of her wounds, and she's tasked with saving her family's failing restaurant, which is under threat by her high school ex-boyfriend, who is the town's food critic. And one day, mid-meal, mid-review, he kind of passes out and dies in her restaurant, and she becomes the main suspect in his murder.
Oh, I love that. I feel like I want to go back and reread it again after. Next up, what inspired you to write Arsenic and Adobo? Is there a specific event, a specific person that drew you to creating Leela and the characters and the setting of being outside of Chicago?
Yeah, so first of all, I was born and raised in Chicago, so I knew I wanted, the set to be part of the setting. But for me, I wanted to play with a lot of the tropes. So basically, there was 2 major inspirations. One, I always knew I wanted to write my own cozy. It's mine and my mom's favorite genre. And, we read tons of culinary, and cozy mystery breaks down even more. They all tend to have their own gimmick. So I write what are called culinary cozies because food is a huge part of them. Mm-hmm. And so, I love these books, but they weren't, when I first started reading them, they weren't super diverse. It was, it was not, I didn't see characters like me or that reminded me of my friends or my world. So I knew I had to add to it. And then, so I got the specific idea for this book when I was talking to my mentor, Kelly Garrett, who is a fellow, she also writes like amateur sleuth crime novels. And we were talking about like some of the cozies we'd been reading lately. And she was just like, hey, did you notice that like a lot of cozies have like rom-com tropes? And I was like, what do you mean by that? And she kind of listed it. And then I was just like, oh my God, you're right. Like, which is why I used the whole Hallmark with dead bodies thing. Again, it's very often, not always, of course, but like it's a woman who from a small town who left to try to make big things happen for themselves. And for some reason, it doesn't work out. A failed career, a failed relationship, something goes wrong with the family, something forces them to return to their small town. And, there's always like a quirky cast of characters and there's often romance involved, and so there was just a lot of overlap, I thought. And so one day I was riding the train to work and the first line of the book popped into my head, like fully formed. So whenever like people ask me like, oh, how did you come up with the names? I'm like, she named herself. Because like the first line of the book is, my name is Lila Macapagal and my life has become a rom-com cliche, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that first line hasn't changed since I first started drafting it back in like 2018.
That's so cool. I feel like a lot of authors will like work backwards and like they'll like form their characters over time. So kind of like speaking of the amazing characters, how did you like create that process? Because you like, I guess you started with a name and a character in your head and then developed them. So is there like a process you go through for all your characters, or does it differ for each one?
Yeah, it kind of depends. Like, so, with Lila, I wanted very much for her to not be like me, where we have some similarities, but we are not the same person. I wanted to make sure that she was not just a self-insert character. So I made some I made some purposeful choices to have her, like, her life obviously is very different from mine. And so like for a lot of the other characters, I do something similar where like I don't necessarily think of a person, I think of a particular quality that I want to highlight, and then I build a character around it. So for example, the Tita Rosie characters, the aunt, it's kind of like the heart of it all. So like the idea that food as love, like food as a love language, which is like really important in my books. I get that from my dad. My father was the cook in the family, but like nobody would read my books and see Tita Rosie and be like, oh, that's just like your father. Like, no, not at all. Right. So I'm inspired by certain qualities in people, whether good or bad. This one is a good one. And then I feel like, oh, this would be a really interesting characteristic that I can kind of play up and build into someone different. And that's usually what I do for a lot of the characters.
I love that. Yeah. And I feel like it's so cool to like talk to authors and have them be like, oh, I saw this like personal influence from like my life, from like this person in my family, but you can't tell them until you're like sitting down and having this conversation. Like I definitely did not feel like, oh, I bet Mia got this from her dad when I was reading about Tita Rosie. So it's so cool to hear about that. I know you talked about food a lot. So yeah, I feel like when I was reading your book, Filipino food definitely lies at the center of your novels. And I loved Lila's fusion recipes. So do you want to talk a little bit about like your favorite Filipino dishes to make, or any like cool fusion recipes that you've made and are like, this is so good, you have to try it?
So like I like for the savory recipes, I don't really make a ton. Like this series has forced me to like do a lot more savory cooking than I usually do, especially like in the Filipino realm. Because like as I mentioned before, like my dad was the cook in the family. So growing up, like, my brothers and I would kind of like sous chef for her. Like we would be helpers, but we wouldn't really be like like our kitchen was too small. He would just like, yeah, you're in the way. So like I never really learned to cook a lot of the dishes growing up. He passed away in 2018 and he didn't leave recipes behind. So the dishes that I include here are ones that like are important to me, and then they're pretty well known like in the Filipino cuisine. And so with them, what I'm doing is I find recipes online and then I tweak them to how I remember them tasting when my father cooked. So that for me, it's a lot of like sense memory, right? So my recipes aren't like the recipe for chicken adobo, which like doesn't exist. It varies from region to region and family to family. Like no one recipe is going to be like the recipe, but which I feel like fits well for my books because it's all about like family and food, passing it down. So because you asked about like my favorite Filipino dish. My favorite Filipino dish is one I'm still too scared to make. It's called kare kare, and it's like an oxtail stew with like a peanut sauce, and there's like offal and vegetables in it, and it's like really, really hearty and comforting and delicious. But it takes like hours to do it properly. And and like there's like ingredients in it that don't sound like delicious when you first say them, but like when prepared well, like tripe, right? It doesn't like call to you, but when prepared really well, it's super tasty. But I've never worked with the rest, with tripe or any kind of offal, before. So I'm just like, we'll see, But yeah, so for titles, I've been choosing dishes that if I don't already know how to make, I feel comfortable learning how to make. So now I'm just like, oh dang, I can't use kare kare in a title because like I have no idea how to make it, or stuff like that.
That's so funny. I love that. Yeah. Do you have any favorite like desserts? I feel like Lila's like so into desserts. She's like all about like the ube and the different cakes and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, I love baking. Oh gosh, like a favorite, that's so hard.
Or favorites.
Yeah, so like basically everything like I've already mentioned in the book. So like the ginitang halo halo, like most people when we say again like homicide and halo halo, which is the second. So halo halo, people it looks like this. It's basically like an ice cream sundae and like a shaved ice parfait like had a baby. Like that's what it's like. So it's usually cold. But in the first book, which has a not so appetizing scene, ginitang halo, anything with the word ginitang in it means it's cooked with coconut milk. And so again, as you've seen in the books, like coconut milk shows up in a lot of dishes, both sweet and savory. So like that's one of my favorites. It's so comforting. There's a dish called carioca, which I will never make because it involves deep fry. Anything deep frying also scares me. So like any dish that involves deep frying, I'm like, oh, maybe I'll have to try something else. But yeah, there's so many different like just like delicious types of rice cakes, ensaimada. The sweets in the Philippines are really great.
Yeah, no, I feel like definitely with deep frying, I feel you on that because my parents would never let me go near like the fryer when I was growing up. So now I'm like, okay, well, I'm never gonna try to fry anything with oil because my parents always were like, you get one splatter on you, that's it. Like that's homicide and halo, like you're gone.
Yeah, I mean, like bless my air fryer, but I feel like there are certain things that like it can and cannot do. And that's probably food. Yeah,
it's not the same. It has to be like dripping like with oil. Yeah, kind of going back to writing and pulling away from food, you have such a unique writing style, and like reading your books, you're just like, oh, this is like so different than like you were saying other cozy mysteries, but it's also different than like other like just like regular mysteries. How did you develop your writing style? And do you have any like tips for anyone who wants to write similar cozy mysteries to you?
I mean, that's one of the things that's a little bit hard because like anyone who like, so I write very like conversationally. Right. So like, it's like, there's one of those things where like, oh, like, when I read, like earlier we were talking about like literary novels, like Taylor, like beautiful prose, like anytime I come across a great sentence, I'm like, oh, I could never write like that because it's not my style. It's not my, I can admire it. I can even aspire to it, but I really feel like at the end of the day, it's not quite, at least where I am as a writer now. I'm still very early in my career. So like, I'm not going to, box myself in, but like, so right now the most fun I have is where I write kind of conversationally, almost like, like my characters are talking, like they are sitting around telling me this like wild story of like a murder that just happened in their town, and you get to kind of like listen in on what's happening.
Yeah,
like that's kind of like what I'm going for. And so I think voice is just so personal, right? And so as I said, like Lila is not me, but everyone who knows me personally and has read my books, they're like, oh man, I can kind of hear, like it's weird. It's like I hear your voice as I'm reading this book. And so like they're like, oh yeah, she's not you. Like they very clearly see that, but the overall like authorial voice, they're like, oh, it's almost like she's reading the story to me. Like they can hear me in it, which I'm like, oh, that's great. And that's just one of those things where I don't know that I made a conscious choice. Just for me, that's how I felt it was going to be told, right? Because again, cozies are meant to be warm and a little bit funny. And that's, you know, someone's like, oh, just kind of go really naturally with it. But, you know, whereas if I was writing something, like right now I'm working on a short story that's about PIs, you know, private investigators. And so it's still humorous and it's still sarcastic, but it's a little more biting, right? It's not as warm and fuzzy. And so there are certain things, like depending on what it is you're writing, you have to make a conscious choice, because like I can't sound the same for everything. And so like just knowing like what it is you're trying to accomplish helps you kind of choose the voice that you go with, I guess.
I really like that. Yeah. And I think like definitely when reading your books, you can tell that the conversations the characters are having is like what makes them so dynamic and like so lovable, or honestly like unlovable. I feel like definitely like, Detective Park in book 1 was making me so angry, like in Arsenic and Adobo, because like, and I think like when he's just there like on the scene, so Detective Park is like the main detective trying to solve the mystery, and he's just sometimes like on scene like not doing anything, and you're just like, okay, he's just like there and he's so like useless. And then when he's like talking, and then he like makes you more angry because of definitely because of like what he's saying. And so yeah, like I feel like your characters definitely, conversation lies at the heart of them. And so yeah, like do you have any like imparting like advice or on like writing or the publishing industry, or even like just like the cozy mystery genre for young authors who are like young aspiring to be authors or write similar books to you?
Oh yeah, like my number one advice to all writers is always like build your community and build it early. So, you know, I have been so lucky to meet the people that I have. Like, so like when I first started back in 2015, which is when I decided, like, you know, I took my very first creative writing class back in 2015. That's when I decided I really wanted to, I've always loved writing, but I never took it seriously. I never thought I could do anything with it until then. And then I was, because I had never finished the story, so I was like, why don't I give it a shot? Like for once, let me see what I can accomplish if I actually take myself seriously. So I took my very first writing class, which happened to be a mystery writing workshop. Like I didn't think I would write mysteries. I actually kind of thought I would write middle grade or fantasy, because those are the ones that kind of drew me when I was younger. But I loved reading mysteries my whole life. Like my family are big mystery TV watchers and mystery readers. So I was like, oh, okay, yeah, this is one of my favorite genres. Let me see what it's about. And then so the woman who taught that class, Lori Rader Day, excellent author. She read what I came up with in her class, and she was like, did you say this was your first time? Because, you know, during our introductions, we kind of talk about like how much experience we've had. She was like, I think you're a mystery writer. She's like, this is really good. I kind of want to see where you go with this. And at the time, she was the president of the Mystery Writers of America Midwest chapter.
Oh,
wow. And she was like, hey, you know, we have meetings and they're free to the public, you know, like to membership costs money, but the meetings themselves are free. And I was like, you know, like I'm not a real writer. Out of that, why would I even do there? And she was like, no, this is the best time, because you can meet people who are a little bit ahead of you and can kind of help you out and give you advice and let you know what you don't know. And then, but you also meet people who are also at the same level as you, who are just starting their writing journey, and you can kind of like do it together. And I was like, you know, I saw the wisdom in that, and she was right. Because, and then through them, like I met my mentor, Kelly Garrett, and through the, and just like, so again, like I started writing in 2015. I didn't get a book deal until 2020. I mean, 5 years is actually pretty short in the writing world. Like I, you know, but during that time, my first book didn't sell. And so I don't know if I would have just kept on going if I didn't have like my community being like, no, you know, you're a great writer. We've read your stuff. We know you got this. You know, sometimes the first book isn't it. You just got to keep going. And they pushed me and they held me up. And they were my beta readers, they were my critique partners, they were my cheerleaders. So yeah, like writing is hard, publishing is harder. So having those people by your side are really, really useful. And I say your writing community because, obviously like my husband has been so supportive, my family, my friends, but they're not writers. And so they don't quite get, some of the ups and downs of the industry. They'll just, I'll tell them something that's like really upsetting and they'll just be like, oh, that's a shame. They don't really know like
Yeah.
what that means, or I'll have like amazing news and then they'll be like, oh, yay, ? We're happy for you. Like they don't, but like another writer will be like, oh my God, that happened. Oh, that's so great, So like just having people who get you on that level, even just one person, if can be so rewarding, so helpful.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I feel like that way about like Book Talk and like the community that it's given me as well. Because I feel like having a space where it's just like a lot of other creators or people who like are on different forms of bookish media, it's like they just get how exciting it is when like you've worked really hard on a post or a video or something and like the author sees it or the publisher sees it and they're like, this is great. Or like when you get that arc that you've been trying to read, and get to like be such a big fan of something and like it allows you to like just express yourself. Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit about how you're like, I'm not like a real writer. Is that like what helped you combat those feelings, is like having that community? Can you talk a little more about that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because there's so many like, I'm not a real writer because I've never finished a story. I'm not a real writer because I don't have an agent. I'm not a real writer because I've never sold anything. I'm not a real writer because my book flopped. Just like so many ways you can kind of talk yourself down and like not, so like you're a writer if you write, right? Like, like maybe you're not a professional writer, right? Okay, like there are some caveats there, but like the gate, like there's already so much gatekeeping in the industry, right? Like why are you going to make it so much harder on yourselves and other people who love books and words as much as you do? So for me, when I decided to take it seriously, when I decided to see how far I could go with this, that's when I'm like, okay, yes, I'm a real writer. Again, even like I said, like my first book, it got me my first agent. It won awards, it got me grants, it got me all kinds of things, but it never sold. And it's really easy to just be like, oh, I'm a failure, but no, right? I'm just like, I'm a writer, I'm just going to keep on writing. And that's kind of like the secret that it's the writing is kind of a long game, right? And also like, yes, I sold a book, but does that mean I'm going to stay published? Like you have to just keep on, like, does this mean like, oh, I have published books now, this means I will never face rejection again? No. It doesn't end.
Yeah. Oh, that's such good advice. I feel like it's so similar to like Finding Nemo, where you're like, you just gotta keep swimming, you just gotta keep going. I love that. I know you talked a little bit about like what's next. So do you have any updates on like new books that you're coming out with, you're working on? Can you tell us a little bit about book 3?
Yeah, sure. So book 3 is titled Blackmail and Bibinka. Bibinka is a rice cake that is it's served year round, but it's traditionally served around Christmas time. And so I chose that because book 3 takes place around Christmas. So that one, so in Arsenic and Adobo and also in Homicide and Halo Halo, I kind of like mentioned like Lila's like shady cousin Ronnie, who was like Tita Rosie's only son. He ghosted the family like 15 years ago. But in book 3, he's returned. And so, it's like the return of the prodigal son. He's like, I'm back. I swear I'm good now for realsies. He's bought a winery in town. He's supposedly setting down roots. And so, Tita Rosie is like so happy to have her son back, but like Lila is hesitant, right? Like she knows that wherever he goes, trouble follows. And then, she's proven right when one day one of his investors is murdered and he becomes the main suspect. And so and then like lots of secrets start coming out, and so she gets pulled into again, not for him because she doesn't care about him, but for Tita Rosie, like it's her son. she knows that, he's blood. We gotta give this a shot. So so book 3 is about that. Takes place around Christmas time and is set at a winery. That comes out October 4th.
Okay, perfect. I
Yeah.
love that.
And right now I've started writing book 4, which comes out sometime, I believe it's summer 2023, and is titled Murder in Mamon. And I've got it outlined. I've just started drafting. So yeah,
What's
early
the
days.
food for that one?
Mamon. It's kind of like a small like chiffon cake or small sponge cake.
Ooh, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, all of your books always make me so hungry. I'm so excited. Are all of the like books gonna be about her cousins? Because I feel like they go from like cousin to cousin or like relative that's around her age. Or do you think in the future we might get a book that's about one of the aunts or something like that who's the main suspect?
Book 4 is about the Calendar Crew.
Oh my gosh, I love the Calendar Crew. I was telling my
Mhm.
mom, actually, she's like a big fan of Jesse Sutanto's books, and
Yep.
she was like, "Are these similar?" And I was like, "There's aunts in this one too," because she's reading Four Aunties and a Wedding.
Oh
And
yeah.
she was like, "Oh, who are they?" And I was like, "I love their names because they're like April and June. Like that's so cute." Yeah. Do you have like any like story behind that of like, or did that just come to you and you're like, "Isn't that so cute?" Because I don't
It
know.
kind of, I mean, it kind of came to me because there are a lot. I know multiple Filipinos who are named April or May or June. Like my cousin's wife is named May. I know, like in high school, I knew at least 2 Filipino Aprils. Uh, June is technically more popular as a male name, like Jun.
Mhm.
But there are some female Filipino Junes as well, like spelled like the month. And so I was just when I was just, usually I don't put a lot of thoughts into names. It's I don't know, names are really hard for me. So like when I'm drafting, like I'll just like, this is a placeholder name, and then like it'll stay just because I can't think of anything better. But like it was almost like with Lila's name, it was like a flash of inspiration. It just came to me, and I was like, oh yeah, those names, totally Filipino. They all have to do with months. They can be the Calendar Crew. Like those, I didn't even have to think of that hard. It just like really came to me.
That's awesome. I love that. Yeah, when I like first saw them, I was like, these aunts are like giving like Four Aunties and a Wedding vibes. I can't wait for them to like cause chaos because I think I don't know whether it's just like an Asian aunt thing, but like if a book has Asian meddling aunts in it, like I will read it and just like love them,
Oh
even
yeah,
if they're like annoying and cause problems. Because I'm like, what else are they going to do?
I know. Yeah, Jesse and I talk about it all the time. Like Jesse and I are friends. I'm just like, yeah, it's like you love them. They're very they're a lot to deal with, and then like now that we're getting older, I'm just like, oh no, we're like entering our auntie phases, and we're just like, oh god, are we going to become them too?
Well, at least when you're writing them, you can be like, wait, I've said that, and then be like, no, I can't put this in the book. This is because I feel like I've seen like Nisha Sharma's TikToks about it too, and she was like dating Dr. Bill and like writing the aunties into that one. And it's just like the similar theme I'm seeing more and more. And I'm like, yes, always more aunties in books. You did talk a lot about like your favorite mysteries and how you like grew up like reading mysteries. I know my personal favorite growing up was like those Nancy Drew books. I was hooked on them because my mom was hooked on like Nancy Drew and Hardy
Yep.
Boys growing up. So do you have any like favorite mystery books or shows or movies that you just want to recommend?
I mean, when I was growing up, so I grew up in a multi-generational household like Lada did. So it was like my maternal grandparents, my parents, me, my brothers, my cousins, sometimes, aunts or uncles or other family members would come and go. So like with my grandparents, I was watching stuff like, Murder, She Wrote, Matlock, Prairie Mason, like that kind of really, really old school stuff. I found Encyclopedia Brown on my own. That was always my favorite when I was younger, but my mom got me into Nancy Drew. She got me into like Mary Higgins Clark as we got older. Now that like I can really like I know that there's when I was younger, like I thought, oh, it's not super diverse. And that's because like I at the time didn't have the ability to like search for what I wanted. Like I only knew like whatever like the mainstream was pushing. But I'm part of an organization called the Crime Writers of Color. And it's like amazing how many wonderful like mystery and crime fiction books are out there. by other like writers. So like I mentioned Kelly Garrett. So like if you want something more humorous, her early series, the Detective by Day series, like Hollywood Homicide and Hollywood Ending, so fun, really hilarious. But her newest book is one I really want. It's called Like a Sister, and it follows a young Black woman who finds out that her sister is dead. The first line is like, I found out her estranged sister. Like I found out my sister was back in New York on Instagram. I found out she was dead like through the New York Post. So like her sister is like a celebrity influencer basically, and her death is ruled like an accidental overdose. But she doesn't believe it. She thinks that there's more to it. She believes her sister was murdered, and so she kind of like starts to dive into what her sister had been into and like kind of the darker side of like her sister's like celebrity influencer life. And it was so good. I love that book.
No, I feel like I have to read that because I think for me, like I can't do like mystery thrillers that are like too dark. So that's why I really like cozy mysteries, because I feel like they're so fun. Like you're saying, they're just like a hug. So whenever it's like a thriller that's like scary, I'm always like, ooh, like I'm just shaking.
This is more, this is more like kind of like more domestic suspense. Like if you want cozy, especially culinary cozies, like so Mango, Mambo, and Murder by R.V. Reyes is like the Caribbean kitchen. It takes place in Miami. It's Cuban food influenced. There is a new series coming out this summer by Jennifer J. Chow called Death by Bubble Tea, which centers around like a night market in California. 2 parts Sugar, 1 part Murder by Valerie Burns is another upcoming cozy mystery by a woman of color. And if you want something that's like, it's not quite a cozy, but it's also not it's again more traditional locked room, like kind of old school mystery. Under Lock and Skeleton Key by Gigi Pondian. Loved it, excellent. And this is something that's like very specific to me because like, you read my bio, I'm a huge nerd. I really love comics and things like that. So Secret Identity by Alex Segura. It's technically kind of like historical. It takes place in the 70s. It's like kind of noir. It's set in the world of comic books in New York City and things like that. It's like a very different kind of mystery, but just so well done.
I love that. No, that sounds so fun. Is that one like a comic or a graphic novel?
No, but it's a regular novel, but there are graphic novel inserts, like the comic book page inserts in there. And I believe it might get a graphic novel adaptation. Don't quote me on that, but I'm trying to remember. Because the author also works in comics. So he's also a comic book writer who's worked on like a million different things. So it's always hard for me to be like, is that the one that's being made into a comic or is it that other thing? So but it is a novel, like the one I just mentioned. So yeah.
That's awesome. No, I love when books have like a picture or something in them and it's like a little treat and you're just like, or like, nonfiction books and they're like telling you their life story and they're like, here's me and my brother when we were 5. And I'm like, I get so excited. But I did want to take a minute to ask if we had any like audience questions or anything to go through. I'm not sure where exactly this would be. But yeah, if we had any audience questions that we wanted to answer or talk about. Or like if we needed to ask for audience questions. I'm not sure.
Oh, I think there's one that just popped into Q&A.
Amazing. So Romina has asked, how do you maintain voice distinction between your characters without their personalities showing signs of blending?
Oh, that's an excellent question. So, like not to toot my own horn or anything like that, but I feel like one of my strengths is voice, I think, but that can also be a double-edged sword because too many times my voice can intrude into the story, right? Because my voice is not necessarily Lila's voice. My voice is not Adina's voice. My voice, right? So there are times where I will look at the page and I'll just be like, this just sounds like me talking to myself. You know, like, yes, it has these dialogue tags, but there, if you remove them, you'd have no idea. It sounds like it's the exact same person talking. So one of the things I do, and I always advise like my book coaching clients to do, is to read your writing out loud. It is very tedious. It takes a long time. But, you know, like, even like, say you don't have time and you're in a rush, you have a deadline, at least read your dialogue out loud, at the very least, because it's dialogue, right? It's meant to sound like a conversation. So if you read it out loud and it feels like strange or awkward to say out loud, you're not quite hitting it right. If I'm reading it, and again, it just sounds like the same person over and over and over again, I'll have to look and be like, what is missing here, right? I mean, like, not everyone necessarily like sounds, you know, super different word choice wise, but you know, there are maybe certain tics or certain syntax or phrases that are constantly, right? So, you know, how can I use that without making them like, oh, excuse me, without making them like a caricature, right? Like I don't want it to be like the 90s and everyone's got like a "you got it, dude" like catchphrase. Like, I don't mean like that, but like, what is something that, you know, some of them are a little bit easier. I'm like, what is something like only Adina would say it like this way? Or, you know, there are certain, you know, a lot of times I keep saying, you know, some, you know, I also know this dude I used to work with who would end all his sentences with like, right? Not because not because it was a question, but because he wanted you to agree with him. You know, and so I think like, oh, lots of people have those little things that where if I hear them say that, I'm like, oh, that this person said that. So I try to think of that with my own characters. Like, do they have their own thing like that? How can I integrate it without being like repetitive or, you know, or just like, well, you just put that there to put that there, you know? So again, like, number one, read it out loud. Number two, think about like special verbal tics and things like that. And I mean, I'm not going to catch it every time, but that's how I handle it.
That's so helpful. And I feel like your characters are like so differentiated. It's just like as soon as a character starts talking, I'm just like, the vibes, they just have vibes like on the page. You can pick them up.
Like, I just like, why do books like no plot, just vibes? Like, if only I could, right? Books
No, I
would
feel
be
like
going
you
so
definitely
much easier
are.
right now.
As soon as you pick up, like, I'm so excited to read it with the book club because it literally seems like as soon as you pick up one of your books, like you feel like you're in like a cozy like restaurant, like, you know, like I just feel like you are there, like you are so transported into this world and your characters do like have such life like outside of the page as well.
Wow, that's exactly what I want. Thank you.
No, it's so true. Yeah, if anyone else has questions, we can probably do one more. I did want to point out that I feel like we have matching nails. I've been seeing
Oh,
you like,
yeah.
like, do we have matching nails?
The weather's getting warmer. I had to start going for the coral. Yes.
Yes. Yes. I was like, gotta get those summery nails in. Yeah. If no one else has any other questions, we can go ahead and wrap up. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I had such a good time talking with you. It's an absolute pleasure to have this conversation about one of my favorite books. Definitely like so up there with like cozy mysteries, because honestly, like I said, just comes to life. I truly appreciate that. Honestly, just like you had such great insight and like really amazing advice for so many like young writers and like young creatives. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing it with us. You can find out more if you're interested in learning more about Mia on her website at miapmanansala.com. And if you want to learn more about Book Talk, get tickets to our flagship conference, you can follow us at Book Talk Event on all socials or check out our website, www.booktalkevent.com. Thank you again, Mia, and I hope everyone had a great time tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great chatting with you all.